Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to have a great turnout today, and there's been a lot of interest in Mosen's presentation, and so I am going to record it, and so we can share it with some of our colleagues. I know that Mosen is given this presentation, and I've heard from a number of different people from different places that it was viewed with great interest, and so I'm excited to see it. And Mosen, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know if you can see my screen and I can move forward. Perfect. Okay, thank you. All right, so before I get started, I want to actually show you something. So there's a link over here that connects you to a Microsoft whiteboard page. I'm going to show you. I want this presentation to be as interactive as possible. So at any point, if you have any thoughts that you want to share with me, this is a space for brainstorming. You can zoom in any of these boxes and write your thoughts, comments, whatever you think. I'm going to use these comments and thoughts later to improve the quality of this presentation. And hopefully this will give all of us a good idea of where we are standing when it comes to using LLMs. I'm going to paste the link into the chat so everyone can access this page. All right, with that, let's get started with this presentation. So a little bit of history about this presentation. I gave this presentation 2-3 weeks ago in Wisconsin Association of Floodplain Stormwater Coastal Management, and it was well received. Now, I've made a lot of changes with conversations that I've had with many people since last 3 weeks. I have tried to make it a little bit more towards our team and how we can essentially use some of this information a little bit better. I'll tell you what I've added. A couple of things before I go into my slides. Number one, I am not a software engineer or software developer or data scientist. My background is H&H. So although while I'm interested in how many tokens it takes to run these LLMs, I don't care about it personally right now. I'm mostly care about the application of these LLMs and what I do in my daily work. So that would be the focus of this presentation, not the theoretical basis of generative AI and LLMs. All right, so with that, this is the agenda that I'm going to talk about today. I would consider myself successful if I can clearly answer 3 questions. Number 1 is, what are LLMs and what they do? Number 2, why do we need to use them in H&H? And number 3, how are we going to use them more efficiently? And what are some best practices on that? I'm going to spend most of my time on item number 4, which are some of my experiences with LLMs in the projects that I've been involved with, and some of personal best practices to share with you. And I will conclude my talk today with some final thoughts about LLMs and how we can, as a company, use them better to achieve some of the goals, specifically when it comes to hydrologic and hydraulic modeling. All right, so one thing that bothers me a little bit is that AI has been this buzzword that everybody is talking about without talking specifically about which portion of it we are talking about. So this slide is just quickly, I'm going to tell you that AI is the umbrella word, and under that umbrella word, there are other terminology, other words that are used. This gives you a historical framework of AI. AI is not a new idea. If you're using a regression model, that's considered an artificial intelligence model as well. And if you're using a deep learning model such as LSTM, that is also considered an AI model as well. But one thing that you have heard a lot these days is generative AI, which is essentially a type of AI that uses neural networks and deep learning to produce something that is similar to a text that a human has generated. Well, you can see that the original in the quotation mark and it's red. And that's because, and there's a lot of debate on, is the content generated by generative AI is original or no? Where is it coming from? And I can talk about this for hours, but let's move forward and we will come back to this topic again. So this is generative AI. Now let's talk about LLMs. Well, when we are talking about LLMs, we are talking about these models that have been designed to be able to get text as human input and generate text that sounds like us, sounds like human. There are different types of large language models. There are one specific type of them that are called multimodal models that can generate text, images, videos, so on and so forth. And again, they create text, human-like text for you, with that, which makes them powerful. I'm pretty sure you have heard ChatGPT. It's a very popular large language model. It's an API that allows you to write text. It's a pre-trained model, and it's been trained over petabytes, millions of gigabytes of data that is available online for free. All the textbooks, movies, music, so on and so forth. So these are pre-trained model, which means that you do not need to train these models based on your data. Gemini is the Google version. There are many, many other versions. I have just 3 sample photos over here for you. All right, so now we know what LLMs are. Now, how do they work? So in order to work with LLMs, I'm sure you all know, you need to provide a prompt for that. These prompts are read by LLMs and they create a response for you. The analogy that I like to use is the analogy of a parrot. Consider these models as very, very smart parrots that have read a lot of books and have watched a lot of movies and a lot of scientific articles, and they are exceptional in remembering all of that details of the things that they have seen. And when you ask a question to this parrot, the parrot goes to its memory and says, this question is familiar. I've seen these words, the combination of words somewhere, and follows those patterns to tell me to understand what usually comes after those words, and puts these sentences and words together to come up with an answer that sounds right. And again, I want to highlight that it sounds right. It's not necessarily right, because it can generate something based on the pre-trained data that's been trained from. Okay. Now, the goal in this presentation, one of the goals is to show you how we can generate some prompts that help us to generate some of these responses that are that have the higher probability of being more accurate and are useful for us as well as H&H modelers. And that leads me to the topic of prompt engineering. A couple of things. We want to write good prompts. But for example, if you want to ask ChatGPT or any other LLMs to summarize an article for you, providing a prompt that says summarize this article for me, that would be an example of bad prompts. Now, what are different types of prompting? I'm going to categorize them into 3 different types. One would be zero shot. That would be asking a question and asking your LLM to generate a response for you. The question and an answer, simple, that's it. One-shot prompting takes one step further, and in addition to providing some context for the LLM, you will provide an example as well. Let's say that you want to create a pamphlet. In order to create that pamphlet, you provide the context of what you want to design, what you want to write in it, and also you provide a pamphlet that your firm has designed, and essentially provide more training for that specific model to generate something that is tailored based off your needs. And then few-shot prompting, instead of providing one pamphlet, if you provide multiple, 1, 3, 4, you are going to help the model to be trained based on your likings, based on what you like to see in the pamphlet, and it helps the model to generate better results. Okay. And then the concept of reinforcement learning from human feedback is a very, very important one. And this is something that I usually use to generate responses that I like. And it essentially means that you go to a back and forth with your model LLM, let's say ChatGPT, and provide feedback to generate something that is useful specifically for you. Okay, we are going to come back to this reinforcement learning from human feedback later in the presentation. All right. This is the analogy that I really like on how to provide a good prompt for the LLM, let's say ChatGPT. And I call this analogy the consulting firm analogy. If I'm going to do a project, and if Joe wants to brief me on that project and what I need to do, these are the steps that probably Joe will take to explain to me what the project is. First of all, he's going to tell me the goals of the project. What are the objectives that we are trying to achieve? Then Joe is going to provide some context for me. This is the background of the project, the history of the project. This is what we have been doing before, and this is what we are going to do in the future for me to be able to understand what the project is and how it works. And then Joe is going to tell me that you don't have 60 hours to charge on this project. Unfortunately, DOT has some money shortages, and you need to charge only 16 hours for this project. And that would be the constraints and the limitations of the project. And we are going to use HEC-RAS 2D. For some reason, we are not going to use HEC-RAS 1D. Okay. And then eventually, Joe will give me some examples of the reports that we have been writing before for these sort of projects, for these types of projects. So I can learn from those reports and write a report that is similar, but maybe a little bit better. Okay, so this is the process that you need to follow to provide a clear prompt to your large language model as well. And that's the analogy that I call it the consulting firm analogy. You're going from broad task definition to a clear AI task instruction that can generate the response that you will probably like. Okay. Now that we know this, let's go through the examples. And the first example that I want to provide to you is essentially a tutorial of how to write a good prompt for any LLMs. And I'm going to start with the goal. So the goal is I have a set of soil temperature data, and I'm going to show you the data as well. But what I want to do, I want to create an interactive dashboard for the client so they can see the trends in soil temperature, see the gaps, see the outliers, so on and so forth. The data that I'm going to work with is from the North Dakota Agricultural Weather Network. I'm going to show you that. The reason that I chose this data, I've done years of research on this data, so I'm very, very familiar with this data. This is some of it for today, but if you want to download all of it, it's right over here. When you click on this download all data, it will give you a very big CSV file, which is, I think, a gigabyte big, and it takes a good 5 minutes to open that CSV. But the good thing is that we don't need to open that. Our AI is going to take care of that for us and create that dashboard for us. Okay, let's go back. So this is the overarching goal, the objective of the project that I'm going to define for the LLM. Now, providing some context, I'm going to provide what are some of the columns that I have, what are the depth that I'm interested in, how I want the dashboard to be visualized, so on and so forth. These are the information necessary to be able to build that dashboard. In addition to that, we need to provide some constraints. So for example, I have written that I want this to be a Python script, and I want you to use Dash to create dashboard. Dash is a library within Python. Now, the question is, how do I know these libraries? Dash, Pandas, Plotly, Dash. If you are not familiar with Python, you don't know what libraries to use. Number one, that's totally okay. Number two, you can ask ChatGPT as a pre-processing of your prompt by providing a chunk of your data to it and ask it to suggest some of the libraries that can help you in analyzing the data. So to me, that's the best way of finding out what libraries are suitable for the type of analysis that you want to do. Okay. Now, other things are how the data should be handled. So the data is in degrees Celsius. I provided the equation for the model to convert the Celsius to degrees Fahrenheit and some other information. But specifically, look at the first one, this prompt. This prompt is incredibly vague. Like, what does effectively even mean in this prompt, right? The reason that I'm going to include this prompt into this sentence in my prompt is that it's absolutely fine to have some vague prompts as well. You don't need to create a perfect prompt. You have time to provide your feedback. Remember the reinforcement learning concept? You have time to provide your feedback when the model has generated some results. Okay, let's move ahead again in constraints. How do I want the code to be documented is important. So you can provide some comments on that. And the performance of the model is important as well. Although if you take a closer look at these two bullet points, you will see that again, these are some vague bullet points. You can make it more specific. But again, this is a learning process, right? I want to create a prompt that is maybe not 100% clear. Okay. Again, visualization quality. I want these visualization to be publication ready. I want to show it to the clients. So I do have some criteria, some qualities in mind for the visualization as well that I have written over here. And I want to have a box and whisker as well to give me the yearly indication of how soil temperature varies at different depth. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell the model that these are my inputs. These are the columns in the CSV file and the data type. Now, in red, again, the question would be, how do I know the data type? The best practice is to provide a chunk of your data to the model and ask what type of data you have. And then once you have the answer to that, add that into your prompts. This is something that I use more frequently. Okay. And then the user will interact with dashboard as well. That's something that I would like. This is the interactivity portion of that. Example data set, in addition to explaining what the data set is and providing some examples for it, I've also provided a copy of a chunk of that data set that shows the station, the time, and different depth in the data set as well. And eventually, what do I want to see? The outputs for the model. I want to see the temperature plot, a line plot, the time period that the data is available, the time period of the gap in the data, and an interactive box and whisker to give me insight about my soil temperature in this example that we are going to. And finally, the instructions for the model to create the dashboard. Okay, so this was all the process that I talked about. Now I'm going to show you actually the ChatGPT prompt that I have written. So I copied and pasted all of that as one very long prompt. You can see all of that is over here. And this is the instructions that I just showed you, right? Okay, so ChatGPT goes ahead and writes this Python script for me with the libraries that I specified. And at the end of it, it also gives me some key steps in the code as well. Now, the question is, do I need to be an expert in Python to be able to run this code? The short answer to that is no. I would consider myself an intermediate programmer. I'm not very good at programming. I also have some background in programming as well. But you need to know how to run the code. That's the minimum requirements. So you can copy this code and go to your code environment and run the code. So you can see that I have actually put the initial version of the code over here and ran that code. Before I show you this interactive process and the demo, I'm going to go back to my presentation and show you the first results that I got. It generated something, but it gave me a warning as well. The warning is about slicing the data slicing some of the data. So I just copied and pasted this warning over here for ChatGPT as a feedback, and I told it that I'm receiving this warning, get rid of it without changing the logic of the code. And also look at the box and whiskers, they're on top of each other, right? It's hard to determine which depth is which box and whisker. So I also added this feedback that fixed this for me as well. So now let's go back to the my code environment, and this is the revised version of the script that it provided for me. And this is the dashboard. Now, so the dashboard provides a site selection bar that I can select the site. It gives me an interactive plot of soil temperature at different depth. I can zoom in. I can take a photo and insert it in my report. I can zoom out and do a lot more analysis because this is an interactive plot. In addition to that, it gives me the box and whisker that I can see the mean, median, and lots of other information about different years of data that I have. Okay. It provides the data, the range that the data is available, and the number of data gaps that I have. Another cool thing about this is that it gives you the insight about your data. For example, let's go to my favorite city in North Dakota, Fargo, and I'm going to select that station. And the visualization is going to change in a second to Fargo. And now you can see that clearly there are some outliers in the data in 2020. How do I know that? Because I doubt that the soil temperature in Fargo gets as high as 325 degrees Fahrenheit. So I know that this is an outlier. And to confirm that, I'll take a look at the year 2020, and you see all of these outlier points for this site. So immediately it gives you this good insight about your data, and also you know that there are 666 gaps in your data as well, to be aware of that. Okay, so valuable insight by actually adding your information in text format for an LLM and generating a code for you. Okay, so this is example number one that I want to share with you. What I want to highlight is that you're not always so lucky to be able to get a working code in the first couple of times. It's a process. It's reinforcement learning. You need to go back and forth. This worked, this didn't work, copy and paste the error, the warning for it, and eventually it gets to a point that it'll be able to give you a working code. Okay, so let's talk about some of the boring stuff that we do, and we want to automate those as well. So the first thing that I want to talk about the boring stuff is going to be a project. This was a DC integrated flood modeling project. Sherwin actually called me and told me that we have all these DSS files that have reference points and reference lines. What we want to do, we want to extract these data into an InfoWorks ICM. So essentially, we want to extract every single line in the DSS that represents a hydrograph or a stage level and create a CSV file that can be imported into InfoWorks ICM. Can we automate this or not? So I wrote a Python script that creates the Excel file, but I don't know what is the format of the CSV that InfoWorks ICM accepts. So we talked with somebody who's familiar with InfoWorks ICM. We contacted them, and we figured out that we need to add some text on top of the dates, on top of the data, to be able to make InfoWorks ICM recognize this CSV. Now I'm going to tell you how it looks like. So we have this DSS file, and I think they had hundreds of these DSS files for the HEC-GRAS 2D models. So we do have this DSS line that has the reference points and reference lines. And what we developed was a Python code right over here. I'm going to quickly show you how it looks like. This is the Python code. But the problem is the person who's operating this doesn't have any Python experience, so they cannot run this code. The solution is to providing a graphical user interface to this. The problem was that I'm not a software developer, so I don't know how to do that. But I know somebody who has some information about software development, and that's the LLMs and ChatGPT. So with the help of ChatGPT, I found a library that allows you to create a graphical user interface. And using that library, created this graphical user interface exactly for that purpose. Find your DSS, provide your reference lines, and then we want flows, and then some names for the CSVs, and run the code. And after a couple of seconds, you can see that the CSV files show up that you can import into InfoWorks ICM. That saves a lot of processing time that now can be focused on strategic thinking and checking the model results. So that's another example of how it can automate some of the boring stuff that we do, and they can be automated. Okay, going back to the presentation, I have some more examples for you. And these examples, well, this is the graphical user interface. It looks like a Windows 98, if you remember how the Windows look like, but it gets the job done, so why not? Let's have some nostalgic Windows 98 Windows to us as well. Okay. The other examples that I want to share with you are smart integrations. We want to be able to use already developed software packages and use their and essentially leverage their graphical user interface to do some stuff as well. And the best way of explaining that is through toolboxes in ArcGIS Pro. I'm pretty sure that some of you have used Model Builder to create toolboxes, but there's one big limitation for Model Builder within ArcGIS, and that limitation is that you are limited to the tools that are native to ArcGIS. You cannot use other libraries. But if you use Python to create toolboxes, in addition to using ArcPy and all the tools within ArcGIS, you can use the tools that are available in open source Python packages as well and create better toolboxes. A good example of that is downloading the NOAA Atlas 14 raster gridded storm and import that into ArcGIS, clip them to your project extent, and then create a storm distribution to it and save that as a DSS file. The part that I'm going to show you is only handles the first two boxes over here. We have codes for Python codes for the last two boxes as well. But essentially, it looks something like this. Let me show you. I think I do have an ArcGIS open here to show you. There we go. So this is essentially, this is the buffer of my project area. I have developed this toolbox that is called NOAA Atlas 14 Toolkit. And behind the scene, if I edit that, you will see that it's a code. It's a Python code that imports ArcPy and other libraries to be able to handle NOAA Atlas 14 grids. And I have put the graphical user interface of the ArcGIS toolbox on it. So now you only need to have some output directory, a project name, clip feature, which would be the perimeter of your area, and the base URL connects to NOAA Atlas 14 FTP and downloads the data for you and saves that into your output directory. This is, I call it smart integration because it leverages the toolbox environment of ArcGIS to be able to do something for you that saves your time and also makes your processing more accurate. Originally, I think Anthony Holder shared an Excel sheet with me that does this process, and that gave me the idea of maybe that can be incorporated into ArcGIS instead of having an Excel sheet. And I should have Excel sheets somewhere over here as well, and I will show it to you maybe. Let's see if I do have it over here. There we go. That's the Excel sheet for, there we go. So you can see that there are instructions for this Excel sheet that you need to follow. And then these are the commands. Good luck if you get one of these, get a space in between these, and then figuring out where you are mistaken. Making it as a published toolbox makes it much easier to navigate for people maybe who are not initially familiar with that Excel sheet and Python as well. Okay. The other one that I want to talk about is calculating curve number. This is something that we all have done at some points, and it takes some time, especially if you are working with a larger area. Again, this is a Python code behind this process, and you'll provide the soil shapefile and land use shapefile and a lookup table, and it will do all the processing for you, and it gives you the raster of the curve number for your area and an average of the area as well. I'm not going to go through, I think I've presented this before to majority of you in this call, so I'm not going to go through details of that. Instead of that, I'm going to provide some other examples that I think would be interested for you. These are something new that I did not present in Wisconsin, so new information here. I had a conversation this week with Doug Blomo about there is a lot of scripts out there, how we can put them together in a way that people can use these scripts, assuming that there is no IP issues with them. When I joined AECOM a year and a half ago, I realized that I'm developing something that has been developed before, but I was not aware of. So this would be one use case of that. So I had that conversation with Doug on Monday, and went ahead and created something. It's called a Copilot agent or a custom GPT. Um, these are different names depending on what you're using. I developed something called Script Sense, and I uploaded all of my scripts to the Script Sense, which is a custom GPT. Essentially, when I say custom GPT or an agent, it means that I have trained that model based on my data, the scripts that I have written. So I have trained that model based on that, and I'm going to show you the results. So first of all, if you haven't used Copilot before, highly recommend it. I like to use Microsoft Edge for that. I've realized that it's a little bit faster than Google Chrome. I don't know why. So I'm going to use the Copilot over here button and go to AECOM Copilot. And you can see the Script Sense is an agent that I have developed. Now, first I'm going to show you how I developed this agent. So you can create your agent over here. Another one that I'm working on is I'm trying to create an agent for Minnesota Drainage Manual. So we can ask questions and it answers based on Minnesota Drainage Manual. But let's say we want to create an agent over here. You will be connected to Copilot Studio. And in Copilot Studio, in the configuration, you can describe what your agent do, instructions, and provide some knowledge base for your agent. This is the information that only you have or your company has, and it will not be shared with anybody else. And just to make it strictly, just to make the agent to give you responses strictly based on your data and not the web, you can turn this off. And this limits the interaction of your agent with web. So I did the same thing and I created that Script Sense based on some of the scripts that I have developed just to show you how it looks like. Let's see, if we go over here. I provided the description for it, some instructions for the model, what to do, what not to do. And this is really important. And it's a big document over here. And for the knowledge base, I have provided the scripts that I have written and the documents that explain them. And the good thing is that this data is not shared outside of AECOM because this is connected to AECOM SharePoint. So these are the libraries, the Teams folders that or SharePoint sites that I have access to. All right. So this is how I developed it. Now, what it does and why is it useful? Let's say that, again, Joe is going to write a script and he does not know if that script already exists within AECOM or not. So Joe can come to Script Sense and says, I am working on a project and I want to download data from StreamStats. Do you have any scripts in your database about StreamStats? And ask that question. It will go through the knowledge base that I provided for it. And it tells that, yes, I can find something that uses the USGS StreamStat API, and it gives you the reference for that. And that reference is hosted by AECOM, which is the summary of the code that I have provided for that. When you click on that, the summary will be open, but you can interact with that over here. Like what Python libraries used in the script. And it will take a look at the documents related to that, and it gives you all the Python libraries that have been used in that script to do it. So you can interact with the database of scripts that you have uploaded for in this Script Sense. Now, it can even get better too. So I'm going to ask another question. Do you have any scripts about soil temperature? Right. So this is a soil temperature dashboard that I provided for you. It also gives you some information about how to run that as well, which is very, very informative. Now, let's say I don't know who developed this script, but I want to ask some questions. Who can I contact to learn more about this script? Based on the documentation that's been provided with the script, it knows that I have developed that script. Since this is in an AECOM, it knows that this is my email address. And if you want to learn more about this script and how it works, you can contact Mosen to learn more about this script. Script is just one example. You can provide PDF, you can provide lots of other information, and then ask questions about the knowledge base that you have provided for the large language model. It's not just a script. In this case, since I have a lot of script, it makes sense for me. But you can provide other things as well, even Excel files or even Word documents, even PowerPoint presentations. You can create a very large knowledge base on that. So this an example of how we can manage the data and access the data that's been developed, at least in my mind, that's been developed within AECOM, and maybe we are not familiar with it at this point. This is a good way of managing that data. Okay. And the last thing that I want to share with you, last tutorial, and then I will give you my final thoughts, would be a little bit about your personal and professional development. I think my background is in academia. I used to be a professor. I strongly feel that there hasn't been any better time for learning new things. And I say that because I do understand that people have different ways of learning. Some people learn through listening to podcasts, some people through videos, reading, summaries, short form content, so on and so forth. These LLMs are providing such powerful tools for you to be able to learn things that you didn't know before. And I'm going to give you a short demo again of something called Note LM. And let me go to my, okay. So what I did over here, I provided my presentation that I'm giving to you right now and the audio of my presentation to this Note LM. And Note LM adds this into the sources. And based on these sources, based on these transcripts of the audio that I provided and the presentation, it creates this notebook for me that I can interact with. So I can interact and ask questions about the presentation, and it gives me the answer. The part that is mind-blowing, it's that it's create a podcast based on that, an AI-generated podcast based on the information that you provide to it. So now this is the podcast of my presentation. I'm going to share it with you, but in order for you to be able to hear the voice of that, I need to stop sharing and share it again. So let me do that quickly. All right, so I'm going to provide this AI-generated podcast with 2 AI hosts that talk about my presentation. Let's listen to maybe 15 seconds of it.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into something pretty cool today, how to actually talk to these large language models everybody's buzzing about. You know, LLMs.
LLMs, yeah.
You sent us a presentation by an expert, Mosen, and
Yeah, Mosen.
he had this real world problem. He wanted to build a dashboard, an interactive one, using Python to analyze soil temperature data.
I mean, that's the dream, right? Using these LLMs for stuff that used to take forever. Like, imagine just giving it instructions and boom, you get complex code, visualizations, all that.
It is. It's like having, like you said, a superpowered intern or something.
All right. So first of all, I like that they pretend like they know me. And it's really interesting to see that you can create the short content form of a presentation or anything else. I've been using this to learn more things. I've been using this to learn recently about St. Francis Dam disaster and lots of other things. Very, very powerful for your personal and professional development as well. Copilot is going to come up with their own version of this soon. This is powered by Google right now at the moment that we are speaking. Okay. With all of these examples that I showed you, I want to go to the last 4 slides of my presentation. To me, the power of large language models are beyond task automation. Task automation is the base level of large language models. I find large language models most useful in the process of critical thinking of the workflows that I'm doing. Large language models are not going to do the critical thinking for you, but they provide a thinking buddy that you can go back and forth and find the gaps in your workflows and find how you can automate some of the stuff that are not automated and they can be automated for efficiency. And then eventually, once you go through this funnel, it gives you more time to focus on what is more important rather than spending a lot of time doing the manual job of calculating curve numbers. You can use the curve numbers in your hydrologic model and then spend your time analyzing the results of that hydrologic model, just as an example to share with you. Some of the tips for writing the prompts that is related to that is going to be that prompt writing is an iterative process and it's a cycle. Remember the concept of reinforcement learning for LLMs. You need to provide feedback to make those prompts better, to make the responses better and better. Now, there are different approaches that you can use to make better responses. Role prompting or persona prompting is one of them. You can ask ChatGPT that imagine you are a water resources engineer and you want to solve this problem. How do you approach that? Teaching approach is another one. If you're not familiar with that topic specifically, let's say that you want to learn about a topic, you can ask ChatGPT or any other LLMs that pretend that you are a teacher explaining this topic to students who are new to this topic. Break down the topic for me so I can learn. I can show you another example. Going back to the soil temperature example, I provided a portion of my data for it. You cannot see it over here because it's been expired right now. And then I asked the LLM, how would you approach analyzing this data set? And then I asked it to imagine that you are essentially a teacher and explaining that for me. So it provided some information on what other analysis, what other workflows I can apply to the data set that I have, which is to some extent very, very accurate. I have worked with machine learning models and deep learning models, and I know that all of these suggestions that it's provided over here are very accurate and applicable to the time series data. Okay, so this is how you can interact and find more insight about it. Now, let's say that you want to learn more about specific things over here. I asked that I'm interested in learning about lag features that you mentioned. Explain how they work as if you were teaching a class. This will help me to understand the concept better with a better structure over here, and it gives me the results right over here. It even helps me to apply that in the code that I have asked it to do before. Okay. Last couple of things, last couple of slides, the best practices. Data security is important. So my personal experience tells me that if you're doing this, use those Python libraries that are trusted, that have been around for years. They're not libraries that are going to be disappearing after 2 years. If you develop any applications, make sure that you go through the process of QC by somebody who knows the process of automation or the manual process that you have automated. And I think the best practice for these kind of automation is to have somebody and appoint that person as an automation steward. That means that that person is responsible for version controlling the code and making sure that you are always looking at the up-to-date application. Two things before I move forward. I'm not against spreadsheets at all. They are very, very powerful tools when it comes to learning, when it comes to automating, and I'm excited to work with Copilot within Excel as well. The other thing is that my experience tells me that do not automate things that you don't understand. If there's a manual process that you don't understand, do not jump into automating it first. First, do the manual process, understand all the steps and details that goes through it, and then now you can automate that. And for sharing my final thoughts before hearing how you've been using LLMs, I'm not going to talk about all of these over here. I'm going to highlight two things. Number one is training. I have an academic background. I do value training, and I do believe that digital innovation comes from the ground up, not the opposite way. The people who are doing the manual work and understanding the manual work of time-consuming work are the people who will lead the digital automation. So providing training on how people can use the LLMs and other AI tools will be essential in order to lead the digital innovation race that we are right now in. The other thing that I want to talk about is data privacy. A good practice, a best practice, is that I will not share any client information into the chat GPT. If there is something that, if you are developing a code for a general purpose, you can use different chat GPT models for that. But if you have client data, we should not share that information with ChatGPT. Copilot works with SharePoint sites and the information that is available to us. So that would be our internal GPT or internal large language model for that. Okay. The other items, the other chains are self-explanatory, but I'll be happy to talk about it. I don't want to have a monologue over here. I want to have time for questions as well. With that, I'm going to actually stop sharing and see if there are any questions to be answered, any comments, any thoughts. And please let me know and tell me how you are using LLMs in your work and how you find them useful or not useful, these sort of things. Back to you, Joe. Please don't jump in all together. Yes. You have a hand up.
Hi.
Yep.
So I guess one question with using those Python scripts and like making like an interactive dashboard. So do you have to, before you start running those things in like Copilot, do you need to like download like Dash as like, is it like an executive program in Panda, or
That's a good
would
question.
AI help with that?
That's a good question. Okay, so my recommendation is Dash is a library for Python. So my question is, if, for example, let's say I don't know how to use Dash in the code that I have written, you can ask that question to the LLM that how do I install Dash in my Python environment? And it will guide you through how you can pip install or conda install Dash for your Python environment. That would be something that you can essentially ask LLM to create for you as a supporting document. Let me, I do have an example over here that I can share to make it more clear, because I feel like this is a very good question. Okay, so going back to this dashboard that I created, the next thing that I asked ChatGPT to do for me was, after the second code, was using the revised code, create a comprehensive instructional document. And then it created this instructional document for me, explaining that first you need to pip install Dash, Pandas, and Plotly in your Python environment, and then going through how to import them and how to use all the different parts of the code with some explanation. So this document is crucial to give you an understanding of how this code works if you do not have any prior experience in running the code. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Ratuja, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think part of the question was answered in like this question, but I have like one more question. Like, do you recommend like any other interactive platforms for Python, like maybe like PyCharm or something? Because I have used PyCharm before and I found it like a little bit easier to understand. So, any like
Yeah, PyCharm is good. Speaking of IDEs, I use VS, Visual Studios. PyCharm is
VS.
good. Cursor is a new one that, if you don't want to copy the code from ChatGPT and paste it into your IDE, Cursor has these two side by side, so you can use Cursor as well. What else? There are many of them. It all depends on your. It doesn't matter which one you use. It all depends on your preference. If you feel more comfortable with one of them, definitely use whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay. And sorry, I had like one more question. Have you used AECOM's Oscar and compared with like Copilot or like ChatGPT at all?
Um, there are people who in this call that are probably more um, knowledgeable about Oscar. I haven't used Oscar, but to my understanding, Oscar is used for business developments, and it's different from like a general use large language model. It's mostly trained for all the proposals that have been written in AECOM to help you with business development. But yeah, if somebody else has more information on that, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a couple of questions in the chat. Are you planning on opening up script sends to other script writers in the company? I think that would be a good conversation, a company-wide or at least a region-wide conversation that do we want to create something like this for the region to host all these scripts and making it available. I can make script sends available to everybody within AECOM, but right now it's just based on the scripts that I have developed. So I think that's a good, larger, holistic scale conversation on how do we want to approach data accessibility and management. But I think that's one of the easiest way of doing it. And the second question is, has something similar been done with Excel macros? Can those also be found in the ScriptSense platform or elsewhere? Yes. So that's a good thing about it. Whatever you provide as um, text, like if you have Excel macros, those macros has VBA code behind the scene. You can copy and paste that VBA point in a text document and provide that text document to um, ScriptSense or any other agent that you have developed, and it will help you to find that Excel macros and Excel sheets as well.
Hey, Wilson, I have a question.
Yes.
What guidance, as you're talking about making this available with some of the scripts that you've put together, what has the guidance been on checking those? You know, like, do we have guidance on how to QC, since obviously that's always a big piece of our work?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that has come up in all the other conversations that I have in the last 3 weeks. Right now, the process that I've been taking is asking as many people if they're doing the work and check to see what parts of the script is working and what part is not working. The good example of that is the DC integrated flood tool that we developed. That took about, I want to say, 4 or 5 weeks of back and forth and checking it with different scenarios and different DSS files, reference points, reference lines, so on and so forth, just to make sure that it can handle majority of the cases. But I think a good um, um, a good starting point is to involving subject matter expert in developing these tools by reading the documents that have been posted alongside the scripts on what is the theoretical basis of the code and what's the logic of the code. And that would be the proper QC of the code and publishing them. Carla, your question also reminded me of another important fact about intellectual property. If you're working with a client, there's a good chance that the client gives us permission to share the code, but there's also a chance that the client doesn't want us to share the code. And that's the conversation that I had with Doug as well. So the good example of that, when I was doing my dissertation, I wrote Hydrologic model from scratch. It was a code. And it was for National Science Foundation. The grant was from National Science Foundation. And they really didn't want us to share the code at all. In the contract, they explicitly mentioned that the code belongs to NSF. I get the rights to present the code. I get the rights to present the material based on it, but the code cannot be shared with any third parties. So I think one of the key points over here, maybe something like this exists already, but in the contracts with the clients, we'll probably need, or maybe we already have it, a clause or a sentence that clarifies who owns the code that's been developed. Majority of clients are pretty open to the idea of open source coding. The good example of that is FEMA. FFRD has a GitHub page, and they post all of the code that's been developed for them on GitHub, openly accessible. But in the case of a client not giving us the permission to share that code, then obviously that code should be excluded from any of the data management and accessibility, like my example, ScriptSense. It is a division from your question, but I just wanted to mention that IP is very important too.
Okay, thank you. I guess I can add as well, just like for, you know, the folks who are not into the coding piece, like myself, I have found that I can use Copilot to write more complex Excel formulas. When I just say it'll, you know, embedded formulas and things like that, that would take more time on my part to try and muddle through because I'm not always doing it. I'll ask it, you know, I'll just specifically say, okay, if this, then sum this, you know, the number of times you see it in this other column or whatever, where you end up with 2 or 3 embedded equations, and it just spits it out, and I can just copy that to Excel. And then my understanding from talking to Mosin is that now Copilot's going to be embedded in Excel, so I'm interested to see how that works. The other thing that I've been encouraging people to do is like running emails through Copilot just to get some feedback on structure and things like that. It hones your emails and makes them a little bit more clear in a lot of cases. So versus, you know, running those past a person, AI can do a lot of that for you in like a half second. So just little ways to kind of dip your toe in the water.
Absolutely. Great points.
Great. Well, thank you guys, Mosin and Carla, for your input. Mosin, an excellent presentation. Just fascinating. Looking forward
Thank
to
you.
it. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Great presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.